The house was a tomb. A beautiful, unbelievably expensive tomb, but a tomb all the same. Think of the biggest, quietest place you've ever been in. A museum after closing time, or an empty cathedral. That was the Ashworth mansion. It had everything. Sparkling chandeliers, paintings that probably cost more than a regular person's house. Floors so shiny you could see your own lonely face in them. But it had no heart, no life. This was because of a deep, heavy sadness that had settled into the very walls. The children's mother was gone. She had been the music, the light, the warmth in all these big, cold rooms. When she left, the silence she left behind wasn't just quiet. It was a thick, smothering blanket. Their father, Mr. Ashworth, was a very powerful man. He knew how to make deals, how to build companies, how to make more money than most people could even dream of. But he did not know how to fix a broken heart. Not his own, and certainly not the two little hearts belonging to his children. Looking at them, a boy and a girl who were twins, was like looking directly at his own pain. It was too much. So he did what he knew best. He worked. He left earlier and earlier in the morning and came back later and later at night, filling the emptiness inside him with meetings and phone calls and stacks of paper. This left the twins, just 7 years old, all alone in their palace. They had everything they could possibly want, except for the one thing they needed. Someone to see them. Really see them. Not just as the billionaire's kids, but as two children who were scared and angry and so sad. People came to look after them, of course. A parade of nannies. There was a strict lady with a clipboard. A cheerful young woman who tried to be their friend on the first day. A man who promised exciting adventures. The twins, Leo and Luna, would watch them arrive with their bright smiles and big plans. In their eyes, these people weren't caregivers. They were invaders. They were strangers trying to walk into the quiet, sad world the children had built for themselves and change the rules. So, the twins became experts at defense. They were clever, these two. They knew every inch of the huge house. They would hide the remote controls inside sofa cushions. They would pretend they only spoke a different language when asked to eat their vegetables. Luna, who could turn her tears on and off like a tap, would stage magnificent crying fits in the middle of a fancy shop. Leo would ask complicated, scientific questions he knew the nanny couldn't answer, just to watch them squirm. It was a game, but a sad, bitter one. Their mission was simple. Make the intruder give up and go away. And it always worked. Every single time. The nanny would last a week, maybe 2, then march into Mr. Ashworth's study looking tired and defeated. They'd say the children were unmanageable or emotionally disturbed. They'd collect their money and leave, and the heavy front door would close, sealing the twins back into their quiet, winning loneliness. They weren't bad kids. They were heartbroken kids. Their misbehavior was a test. Can you handle us? Can you handle how bad we feel? Is anyone strong enough to stay? So far, the answer had always been no. Their father was gone, their mother was gone, and every adult who came to replace them was chased away. The mansion, with all its gold and marble, felt less like a home and more like a fortress they were guarding all by themselves. A very, very lonely fortress. The woman in charge of running the house, Mrs. Higgins, was at the end of her rope. She was kind but tired. Her hair, which she always kept in a neat bun, had little wisps escaping all day long, as if even her hairstyle was frazzled. She had just watched another nanny, the 4th one this year, speed walk down the driveway with her suitcase. Never looking back, she sighed a deep, heavy sigh and went to her computer. She had to post the job listing again. The words were always the same. Loving, experienced nanny for twin children. Must be patient, resilient, and creative. She always wanted to add, must have the patience of a saint and the hide of a rhinoceros. But she never did. She posted the ad and braced herself for the strange and unsuitable people who usually applied. A few days later, a woman came to the service entrance at the back of the house. This was unusual. Most nannies came to the grand front door, full of confidence. This woman came to the back the way the staff did. Mrs. Higgins opened the door. The woman standing there was not young. She looked to be in her late 50s, maybe even early 60s. Her face was calm, with lines around her eyes that spoke of a life where she had done both a lot of smiling and a lot of thinking. She stood very straight, but not in a stiff way. It was a posture of quiet dignity. She wore a simple, spotlessly clean dress and carried a worn but neat handbag. "Good morning," the woman said. Her voice was low and clear, like warm honey. "My name is Eleanor Williams. I am here about the position." Mrs. Higgins felt another wave of tiredness. She needed a nanny, not another housemaid. "I'm afraid the nanny position requires experience with children, and I am not applying for the nanny position," Eleanor said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "I saw the listing for the head housemaid, the one who keeps the upstairs in order." Mrs. Higgins blinked. She had completely forgotten about that ad. The chaos with the children had pushed everything else out of her mind. She looked at Eleanor again. There was something about her. A stillness. A sense of solidness. Like an old tree that has weathered many storms. The house was full of frantic energy. The children's angry energy. The father's absent energy. The past nanny's nervous energy. This woman seemed to have none of that. "The children," Mrs. Higgins started, warning in her voice. "They can be a handful. The upstairs is their domain. It won't be easy cleaning." A small, almost invisible smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I have been cleaning up other people's messes for 45 years, ma'am. A little dust and some toys are not what I would call difficult." There was no arrogance in her statement. It was just a simple fact. Mrs. Higgins was so desperate for anyone competent and steady to join the household. She didn't ask many more questions. She hired Eleanor Williams on the spot as the new head housemaid. Eleanor started the next day. She didn't make a big entrance. She arrived early, changed into a crisp, dark uniform, and got to work. Her tools were simple. A bucket, some cloths, a good polish. She moved through the enormous, silent upstairs rooms not like an intruder, but like a gardener tending to a neglected plot of land. The twins, of course, were watching. They hid behind doorways and peeked over the banisters. They saw this new person, this maid, and they were suspicious. She was not like the nannies. She didn't try to talk to them. She didn't offer to play a game. She didn't even look at them directly. Leo, the boy, decided to test her immediately. He left his most complicated, motorized toy car running in the middle of the hallway she was mopping. He waited for her to step on it, to yell, to tell him to move it. Eleanor simply stopped mopping. She bent down, picked up the whirring car with one hand, turned it off and placed it carefully on a nearby table. Then she continued mopping, as if it were no more unusual than moving a chair. Luna, the girl, tried her own tactic. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom, which was famously messy, and crossed her arms. "You can't clean in here," she announced, her little chin held high. "It's my room." Eleanor paused. She looked at Luna, not at the mess. She looked into her eyes, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet seeing. "All right," she said simply. "It is your room." And she moved past the doorway to the next room, giving Luna her privacy. The twins were confused. Their tricks weren't working. This woman wasn't playing their game. She was just there, cleaning, polishing, folding. A silent, calm presence in the middle of their storm. They didn't know what to make of her. But for the first time in a long time, no one was shouting. No one was threatening to quit. There was just the soft sound of a cloth on wood, and the steady, quiet breathing of a woman who was not afraid of their silence. For the next week, Eleanor simply worked. She was a quiet shadow in the huge house, moving from room to room with her cleaning cart. The twins watched her like two little hawks, waiting for her to break. But she didn't. She did her job with a kind of calm focus they had never seen before. When she polished the grand piano in the music room, she didn't just wipe it. She took her time. She used a soft cloth and a special spray that smelled like lemons and rosemary. She polished every single key, both the white and the black ones, until they shone under the light from the big window. Leo would sometimes sit on the bottom step of the staircase, peering through the door. He remembered his mother playing that piano. The sound had been gone for so long. He watched Eleanor's hands, gentle and sure on the keys, and he felt a strange, quiet ache in his chest and the library. Luna would pretend to read a big book on the sofa. Eleanor would come in to dust the shelves. The shelves were full of beautiful books with leather covers, but also with silly, colorful storybooks the children hadn't touched in years. Eleanor would take each one down, dust its cover and the shelf beneath it, and put it back exactly in its place. She did this with the same care for a dusty old encyclopedia as she did for a picture book about a talking train. Luna watched from over the top of her own book. This woman didn't treat their things like junk or like untouchable museum pieces. She treated them all like they mattered. The children's tricks continued, but they felt different now. They felt less powerful. Leo would accidentally knock over a vase of flowers from a side table. Water would go everywhere, petals scattering on the expensive rug. He'd brace himself for the sigh, the scolding, the look of pure annoyance. Eleanor would just appear. She wouldn't say a word to him. She'd bring a towel and a bucket. She'd get down on her knees and slowly, carefully, soak up the water. She'd gather the broken stem and the petals in her hand. Then, she would look at the flowers left in her hand, their bright colors now wet and ruined, and she'd give a small, almost sad shake of her head. Not angry at him, sad for the flowers. Then she'd go to the kitchen and come back with a fresh, single flower in a simple glass, putting it right back on the same table. Her silence was louder than any shouting. It made Leo feel strangely guilty, but not in a way that made him want to fight back. It made him think. Luna tried her tears. She would fling herself on the floor in the upstairs hall and cry, great big sobs that echoed. She did it right where Eleanor was trying to mop. The old Luna would have screamed if someone stepped around her. But Eleanor just stopped mopping. She stood there for a moment, waiting. When the sobs didn't stop, Eleanor walked away. She came back a few minutes later with a glass of cool water with a single ice cube in it. She placed it on the floor next to Luna's head, within reach. Then she picked up her mop and went to clean a different hallway entirely. Luna's tears dried up from sheer surprise. She was being ignored, but not in a mean way. It was as if the woman was saying, I see you're having a hard time. Here is some water. I'll be over here when you're done. No drama. No begging her to stop. Just space. This was the most confusing thing of all for the twins. Every other adult had tried to control them, to fix them, to win against them. This woman, this maid, did none of that. She just witnessed them. She saw their anger, their mess, their sadness, and she didn't run away from it. She didn't get angry back. She just absorbed it quietly and kept doing her job. She was like a deep, still pool of water. You could throw a rock into it, a shouted insult, a knocked-over toy, and it would make a splash. But then the water would just settle back down, smooth and calm again, as if the rock had never been thrown. The children didn't know what to do with that kind of calm. Their whole world had been noise and chaos for so long. This quiet, steady presence was something entirely new. They didn't trust it yet. Not at all. But they were starting to notice it. And in that huge, quiet house, just being noticed without being judged was a very strange and interesting thing. The breaking point, when it came, wasn't about a toy or a tantrum. It was about something beautiful and old and silent. In the main hallway stood a tall, slender vase. It was pale blue and white, with delicate paintings of cranes and willow branches. The children's father had told them once, in a rare moment when he was trying to be a tour guide in his own home, that it was from China and was very, very old. It had been their mother's favorite. Since she had been gone, it just stood there on its special marble pedestal, a relic of a happier time, untouched. Leo was having a bad day. A really bad day. It was the anniversary of something, though he couldn't quite remember what, only that the air in the house felt heavier and sadder. Eleanor's calmness, which usually just confused him, today felt like an insult. How could she be so quiet when everything inside him was so loud? He needed a reaction. A big one. He waited until he saw Eleanor coming down the hallway with her duster. He looked at the vase. His heart pounded in his ears. This would do it. This would break her calm forever. No one could ignore this. As she got closer, he stepped forward. He didn't look at her. He just swung his arm out, not in a wild way, but in a single deliberate swipe. His hand connected with the cool, smooth porcelain. Time seemed to slow. The vase wobbled on its stand. It tipped, almost gracefully, and then fell to the hard marble floor. The sound was catastrophic. A horrible, sharp, shattering crack that echoed through the entire quiet house, followed by the terrible tinkling rain of 1,000 pieces scattering across the floor. Leo froze. He finally looked at Eleanor. He felt a hot rush of fear and triumph all mixed together. Now she would yell. Now she would call his father. Now she would look at him with the hatred and disgust he felt he deserved. Eleanor stopped walking. She looked at the shattered pieces. She looked at him. Her face didn't turn red. Her eyes didn't blaze with anger. Instead, something in her seemed to grow very still, even sad. She didn't say a word. She walked over, her sensible shoes crunching gently on the tiny fragments. She slowly knelt down right there in the middle of the beautiful, ruined mess. She put her duster aside. Very carefully, she began to pick up the pieces. Not in a hurried, angry way. Slowly, gently, she cradled a large piece with a painted crane in her palm. She ran her thumb over the smooth surface. "This was very old," she said finally. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was low, almost a whisper, but it filled the silent hallway. It saw many years. It held beauty for a long, long time. She looked up from the piece in her hand and her eyes met Leo's. Her gaze was deep and clear and held no blame. It held something worse. Understanding. She looked right at him, this boy trembling with spent anger and rising shame. "It's a sad thing," she continued quietly, "to see something that lasted so long end in a moment of anger." Leo's breath hitched. The triumph was gone, drowned in a sudden, cold wave of something else. Then she asked the question no one had ever dared to ask him. Not his father, not the nannies, not his teachers. She asked it so simply, so directly. It was like a key turning in a locked door deep inside him. "What's broken inside you, child?" she asked, her voice still soft but unwavering. "That you need to break things outside." It wasn't an accusation. It was a real question. She truly wanted to know. Leo stood there, surrounded by the physical evidence of his rage. All the fights, the pranks, the slammed doors, they all led to this moment, to this old woman kneeling in broken porcelain, asking him about the fracture in his own heart. He had no answer. The hot tears that came to his eyes weren't from anger. They were from a relief so sharp it was painful. Someone had finally seen it. Someone had finally named it. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But he didn't run away either. He just stood there, crying silently, as Eleanor went back to carefully gathering the pieces, one by one, as if each one still mattered. A quiet change settled over the house after the vase. It wasn't a big, dramatic shift. It was more like the air after a heavy storm has passed. Still charged, but calm. Leo didn't know how to talk about what happened, so he didn't. He just stopped setting traps for Eleanor. He would watch her work from a distance, his earlier suspicion now mixed with a confused kind of respect. Luna, of course, had heard the shattering crash and had watched the whole silent scene from the top of the stairs. She saw her brother cry. She saw the maid not tell on him. A tiny, curious seed was planted in her mind that a few days later, the children found themselves wandering, bored, into the kitchen area they almost never used. It was a shiny, cold place meant for a chef who came sometimes to make fancy meals. But today, Eleanor was in there. She wasn't making a fancy meal. She had a simple, worn-looking bowl and a wooden spoon. On the counter were plain ingredients: a box of yellow cornmeal, a carton of buttermilk, a little sugar, some eggs. The oven was warming up, filling the room with a dry, waiting heat. The twins lingered in the doorway. The smell was strange. It was earthy and a little sour, not like the sweet pastries they were sometimes given. Eleanor didn't tell them to come in or go away. She just kept stirring the thick, golden batter in her bowl. The sound was a slow, steady thump-thump-thump against the sides. Finally, Luna, who was ruled by a curiosity she often hid, spoke. "What is that?" "This," Eleanor said, still stirring. "This is cornbread. Or it will be." "What's it for?" Leo asked, his voice cautious. "For eating," she said, a simple truth. She poured the batter into a black, well-used skillet. "My grandmother's recipe. She made it every Sunday." She put the skillet in the oven and closed the door. Then she started cleaning her bowl and spoon, running warm water in the sink. The children didn't leave. They stood there, waiting. The kitchen started to fill with a new, incredible smell. It was warm and buttery and rich. It smelled like a kitchen in a storybook, not their own cold, quiet one. When the timer dinged, Eleanor took the skillet out. The cornbread was a perfect golden brown, puffed up around the edges. She let it sit for a minute, then turned it out onto a plate. It looked humble, simple, nothing like the delicate, tiny foods they were used to. Eleanor took a knife and cut 2 small squares. She put them on 2 small plates. She didn't hand them to the children. She just placed the plates on the big, empty kitchen table and nodded towards them. "You don't have to eat it," she said. "But in my house, wasting good food is a sin. So if you take it, you finish it." It wasn't an order. It was a rule. A different kind of rule than they were used to. Not be quiet or be good. It was a rule about respect for the food, for the work that made it. Leo and Luna looked at each other. Slowly, they walked to the table and climbed onto the tall chairs. They picked up the small squares. They were warm, almost hot, and a little crumbly. They took a bite. It was a shock to their mouths. It wasn't overly sweet. It had a solid, gritty texture from the cornmeal. It tasted deeply of butter and eggs and that warm, toasty smell. It was real. It was the most real thing they had eaten in a long, long time. They ate in silence, their small bites the only sound. When they were done, their plates were clean, not a crumb left. They sat there, unsure what to do next. Eleanor took their plates. She washed them in the sink, dried them, and put them away. She wrapped the rest of the cornbread in a clean cloth. "Thank you," Luna whispered, so quietly it was almost not there. Eleanor just nodded. "You're welcome." Then she went back to her work, leaving them sitting at the big table. That small, shared meal at the kitchen table became something important. It wasn't a peace treaty signed with words. It was a truce built on warm cornbread and a simple rule. They didn't suddenly become chatty or hold hands. But the war, the constant, exhausting war against the adults in their home, was over. They didn't know what came next, but for the first time, they weren't fighting against the person who was there. They were just there with her. And for now, in the quiet, buttery-smelling kitchen, that was enough. The days began to find a new rhythm. It was a slow, gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat calming down after a long scare. The twins didn't become perfect angels. They were still 2 sad, confused children. But the edge of their anger was gone, worn down by a calm they couldn't puncture. Eleanor didn't suddenly try to be their mother, or their friend, or even their teacher. She remained exactly what she was, the woman who took care of the house. But now, they started to drift into her orbit, drawn by a gravity they didn't understand. She didn't play with them. She worked, and sometimes they would just be nearby. While she was folding a huge pile of fresh laundry in the sunny morning room, Luna would sit on the floor nearby with a doll. Eleanor would fold a sheet with quick, precise flicks of her wrists. "My son," she said once, her voice matter-of-fact, not sad. "When he was little, he used to hide inside the laundry basket when I was folding. Thought he was a secret agent." She didn't look at Luna, just kept folding a towel into a perfect square. Luna stopped fiddling with her doll. "You have a son?" She had never imagined Eleanor having a life outside these walls. "I did," Eleanor said. The past tense hung in the air, simple and heavy. "He grew up, had a life of his own. Then he got sick. The world took him away from me." She placed the folded towel on the pile. "You don't get over a loss like that. You just learn to carry it differently. You learn to fold the memories neatly, so they don't trip you up every day." Luna absorbed this. It wasn't a story from a book. It was a piece of a real, hard life, offered without any sugar coating. Her own missing mother felt like a giant, messy hole in the middle of everything. The idea of folding that sadness neatly, of carrying it without falling, seemed impossible. But here was a woman who was doing it. For Leo, the lessons were quieter still. He saw his father's expensive, neglected shoes lined up in the closet, dusty and dull. One afternoon, he found Eleanor in the back hallway with a small kit. She had an old, soft cloth, 2 different brushes, and 2 tins of polish. She was working on a pair of her own sensible black shoes. "Can you make them shiny?" Leo asked, hovering at the doorway. "You can make anything shiny," Eleanor said, "if you know how to pay attention to it." She gestured for him to come closer. "See? This brush is for the dirt. This one is for applying. You use a different cloth for buffing. It's not magic. It's patience." She handed him a brush and an old shoe of his own. She didn't give him a long lesson. She just went back to her work, showing him by doing. Leo, who found it hard to sit still for anything, found himself engrossed. The repetitive motion of brushing, the careful application of the dark wax, the rhythmic buffing until a deep glow appeared from nowhere. It required a focus that quieted the noisy thoughts in his head. It was a puzzle with a clear, satisfying solution. He wasn't being managed or entertained. He was being shown a small, useful skill. And in the showing, he was being given a kind of quiet companionship he'd never had. They began to help in tiny, silent ways. When Eleanor was gathering the sheets to change the beds, Luna would appear and take one end, helping to pull the fitted corner over the mattress. It was a tricky job, and Eleanor showed her, just once, the special way to tuck and fold. Luna, who loved puzzles, practiced it over and over, her brow furrowed in concentration. Leo would carry the empty laundry basket back to the linen closet. He would hold the dustpan while she swept. They didn't talk much. There was no forced conversation. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the sound of shared, simple work that Eleanor's stories, when they came, were never preachy. They were just pieces of a life, dropped into the quiet like stones into a pond. Stories of growing up in a busy, noisy neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business. Stories of working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Stories of finding joy in a window box of flowers or a perfectly baked pie. She spoke to them not as a servant to the rich children, and not as a grown-up to silly kids. She spoke to them as people. People who were hurting and who were stronger than they knew. And slowly, without them even realizing it, they began to unfold from their tight, defensive little balls. They began to stretch out, just a little, into the quiet, steady space this woman had created around her. It was a space where they weren't bad or difficult or a problem. They were just there. And for now, that was finally enough. The father had been gone for a month. A long business trip across several countries. He called, of course. Brief, crackling calls where he asked, "Is everything all right?" And the house manager, Mrs. Higgins, would always say, "Yes, sir. Everything is fine." He expected fine to mean no major disasters. No failures. No broken bones. No nannies quitting. He returned on a Thursday afternoon. The London sky was a flat, pale gray. His driver brought his car up the long driveway. He felt the usual heavy weight settle on his shoulders as he looked at the grand, silent house. He was braced for it. Braced for the tense report from Mrs. Higgins. Braced for the distant, cold stares from his children. He walked through the front door, the click of his expensive shoes too loud in the entrance hall, silence. But it was a different silence. It wasn't the sharp, empty silence of a museum or a prison. This silence felt soft, felt lived in. He stood still for a moment, listening. Then he heard it. A faint sound. Not the television. Not an argument. It was the low, gentle murmur of a voice, and then a soft, rustling sound that he followed the noise, his footsteps quiet on the rug. It led him to the big, glass-walled conservatory at the back of the house. The room was filled with green, leafy plants his wife had loved. He hadn't been in there in years. He stopped in the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A sudden, sharp feeling he couldn't name. There, on the tiled floor, which was spread with old newspapers, were his children. They were kneeling on either side of a large, overflowing terracotta pot. Their hands were dirty, covered in rich, dark soil. Their faces were focused, serious, and between them was Eleanor, the housemaid. She was wearing a simple apron over her uniform. She was guiding their small hands, showing them how to loosen the roots of a big, ferny plant. Gently now, she was saying, her voice warm and steady. You don't want to shock it. It's been in this old pot too long. Just getting cramped. It needs room to breathe. The boy nodded, his small fingers carefully teasing apart a tangled root. The girl was holding a fresh pot. Ready. They worked together, a slow, careful team. The father watched, completely unseen. He saw the concentration on his son's face, a peaceful focus he hadn't seen since the boy was a toddler with building blocks. He saw his daughter's tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth, the way her mother's used to when she was concentrating on a drawing. Eleanor said something else, too low for him to hear. And then it happened. His son, his serious, angry little boy, let out a sound. A real, genuine chuckle. It wasn't a mean laugh or a frustrated yell. It was a light, happy sound, like a bell ringing. The girl looked up from the plant. Her eyes, which so often looked through him, were bright. And then they landed on him, standing in the doorway. For a second, she just looked. And then, a smile broke across her face. A real, true, unmistakable grin. It lit up her whole face, crinkling her eyes. It was the image of her mother's smile. It wasn't for him. Not yet. He could see that. The smile was for the moment, for the dirt, for the plant, for the woman who had shown her how to do this. But it was there. It existed in his house again. His daughter's grin and his son's quiet chuckle were like two bolts of lightning in the quiet room. They illuminated everything. He looked at Eleanor. She had sat back on her heels, watching the children. On her face was no look of triumph, no smug satisfaction. There was just a quiet, deep contentment. A glimmer in her eyes that said she had seen a job that needed doing, and she had done it. In that moment, the billionaire understood. He had spent years trying to build a perfect, untouched world for them, a world money could buy. He had given them everything except what they needed. Someone to get down on the floor with them in the dirt. Someone to show them how to gently untangle what was root-bound. Someone to be steady and real and there. The most important thing in his empire, his children, had been saved. Not by a child psychologist or an elite nanny or a fancy program, but by a maid who understood that some broken things aren't fixed with money or speeches. They are mended with cornbread, with quiet stories, with showing someone how to polish a shoe or repot a plant. They are healed by a love that is practical, patient, and as solid as the earth now under their fingernails. He finally saw it, and for the first time in a very long time he felt a flicker of hope.